Okay, we'll go ahead and start. Thanks for waiting. We had a little bit of delay on a House bill, and the first thing we're going to take up is a substitute to House Bill 1326, and that deals with the Public Service Commission and utilities, and I'm going to let Representative John Lunsford explain the bill and what we're trying to do. And tell you what, Mr. Lunsford, maybe better if you go to the mic over there.
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman. I'd be happy to.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. House Bill 1326 came out of an idea we had in our special subcommittees when we're dealing with the Appropriations Acts and looking at a way that where we're tasked with balancing the state budget and appropriating funds to state agencies, and the PSC appears to be an agency where we never fully get a grasp on exactly what their budget is. And several of y'all were in the meeting when we talked about it, and what we're trying to determine is, because they end up doing rate recovery cases and different functions throughout the year, that we would end up appropriating money because they said, well, we anticipate a rate case coming up, or we anticipate a fuel cost recovery or a nuclear site coming on board, and they would ask for the appropriations, but we're not really sure when it occurs or did it occur exactly like it was and what the costs were going to be. And so what we did was simply with 1326, and many of y'all will recall that meeting, and what we did was changed it, because currently, for instance, if you're a regional deliverer of a utility in a regulated industry and you apply for a rate increase, and let's say just hypothetically that your area services nothing but North Georgia, when we appropriate funds out of the general revenue account to pay the state's portion for your, for the specialists and the consultants, all the taxpayers of Georgia have contributed now to pay for a case that affects only a regional area, and we felt that was highly unfair, that someone that works in a regional area, the impact of their case should be felt really and truly by the people that are served by that utility. And so what this bill simply does, and it's a very small one-page bill that says that if you're applying for something as a regulated industry and the state has to hire technical experts, then you will reimburse for those technical experts, you will pay them, and then that cost for them can then be added to your rate recovery, or you can consider it a necessary cost of doing business, and you can recover those costs, but you would recover the cost directly from the people who are affected by the area of service that you service, so that someone in South Georgia doesn't pay the cost for someone in North Georgia, because we felt that was highly unfair, and that's simply what the bill does, Mr. Chairman. And whether they grant them the rate increase or don't grant them the rate increase, the costs that are associated with it would be a recoverable cost either way.
Okay. Any questions? Anybody? Any comments? I do have one. I guess the main thing is clearing the air on who these people would be, what utilities we would be dealing with. We know that the EMCs are not part of this.
No, sir, they are not.
AGL Resources.
Could very well. There's a markup sheet, and I didn't pick it up and bring it with me, and I'll be happy to.
John, you want to hand that? Yeah, it'd be good to know that.
What we're talking about is on House Bill 1326. It matches the cost to the cost causer, basically, is what we're talking about. So the person who caused the cost are going to do it. The PSC needs consultants, and they vary from year to year based on what they're trying to recover. For instance, Georgia Power would be affected. Atlanta Gas Light Company would be affected. Your EMCs would not be affected. And what we're really saying is that because the PSC, Public Service Commission, has to hire these experts and pay them out of the general fund, so different parts of the state are paying for services for parts of the state that they would never receive any benefit from, direct or indirect. And it's without limitation to stuff like nuclear power costs, conducting utility rate cases, processing the fuel cost recovery cases, auditing utility affiliates, reviewing telecommunications earnings would be some of the things that experts are hired for. And a typical example would be Atlanta Gas Light spent $1.7 million, almost $1.8 million in 05 rate case compared to the only $300,000 the state spent. So this simply says that you can recover fair and reasonable cost. And, of course, that would be bid or or put through that process. So we're talking about not exorbitant costs that we couldn't recover. We'd have to validate and make sure that they're correct costs. But if you had a regional power company that wanted a rate increase, and there'd be no reason for someone else in the state to have to pony up money for somebody that had no effect, positive or negative, to that, except it would cost them money. And then they can recover the cost on their recovery from their own customer base.
I think Richard Royal has a question for you. Excuse me, it's Ellis. I'm sorry, Ellis.
These municipal utilities would not be subject to this, correct?
I can't answer that, honestly. I don't know. If they came before the PSC, if they come before the PSC and we have to appropriate money mid-year or during the big budget to offset a cost for the PSC, then it would be a regulated industry and it would be affected. So basically, I think it's $600-something thousand the PSC is asking us for right now for anticipated rate cases in the future. We don't know if they're really going to occur. This way, the money would be there when the case occurred.
Representative Lunsford, let me answer that for Representative Black. MEAG members are not included in PSC rate structure, correct?
No, sir.
Okay.
Okay, so they would be exempt.
Yeah.
Really, the question I was getting to, I was pretty positive of that myself. I just wanted to verify it. But how many, some of these cities are served by privately owned telephone companies at one time. How many of those are still in effect, and it would be subject to being brought for a case?
That would be a question, Mr. Ellis, that's better answered by a member from the PSC.
Yeah, we'll let them come up in just a minute.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you,
Yes, sir,
Representative.
Mr. Chairman.
Chairman Chuck, come on up and answer some of these hard questions for us. And Deborah and Bill may need to go to his side over there and make sure.
Make sure I don't get in trouble.
Correct.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Chuck Eaton, Chairman of the Public Service Commission, I'd just like to express my support for House Bill 1326 and thank Representative Lunsford for introducing it. I guess I'll just briefly make a few comments on it. Some of it will be echoing what Representative Lunsford just mentioned. First and foremost, you're matching the cost of the cost causer. I think that in some of these cases, for instance, I believe the last AGL rate case we did, there was a $40 million difference, and to ask for $300,000 or $400,000 in consultants, I believe would be a worthy investment on behalf of the ratepayers when you're talking about those kinds of numbers. It's been stated that the need for consultants varies year to year. So it is hard to anticipate, and these cases can't be postponed. A great example is Atmos Energy just filed their rate case with us today, and by statute we have to act on that within 6 months. So that's not something that we can postpone. And it's hard to anticipate, what those needs are going to be, and this would be something that would be built into each case. As I said before, I think that it'd be a worthy investment on behalf of ratepayers. And one thing to keep in mind, the utilities already get recovery on these consultants. So, they're paying for their consultants out of rate base, and we're asking just for a small portion of what they're using for their consultants. And I know one of the concerns has been that there's been no cap on it. I will say that there is, in a sense, a built-in governor there. I mean, if the PSC ran out of control and just said we want $10 million for consultants, there would be a political impact from that. I mean, I'm sure it would get out that this impact, affected your rates, and we would have to feel the political pressure as consultants and justify to the people of Georgia why we had to pay so much for consultants. So I do believe there's a built-in governor on that, and I'm here for any questions.
I do have a question. I know there are limited consultants you all have, and you may not know them all, but what assurance do we have that, it's not going to be your friend or Deborah's friend or Bill's friend or Doug Everett's friend or Commissioner Baker's friend or Commissioner Spears' friend that you hear what I'm saying?
Yes, I do. I mean, there's obviously there's 4 other commissioners there that would expect to have a good case put up, and I haven't thought of an example that I could have with them.
Well, y'all put out the RFPs, what Deborah Flanagan told me before. So who puts out the RFP?
The commissioners put out the RFP, and we ultimately vote on those consultants. I do know that, and like I said, I mean, there's varied opinions on the commission. We don't all march lockstep, and I'm sure if one commissioner had a special buddy that he was trying to put up as a consultant, there'd be other commissioners that would wholeheartedly object to that, because we're trying to put up the best case possible.
Would be a conflict of interest as well, correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Okay. Any other questions? Okay. Representative, what's your number? 24. Okay.
I'll go back to the question I asked a while ago. How many small utilities do you have to regulate?
Talking about the independent phone companies?
Independent, private-owned phone companies or anything else?
Well, I believe there's, eight traditionally regulated telephone companies now across the state of Georgia. Other than the phone companies, I'm not sure if you characterize anybody else as small. You're basically talking about Atlanta Gas Light, Georgia Power, and Atmos Energy.
About, do y'all regulate any of these private water systems?
No, sir. We don't have anything to do with water.
That's a utility that you're not over. Okay.
Chuck, wasn't there about 15 private telephone companies still left in the state? And wasn't that the number?
I think it's a little more than that, I believe.
17.
Okay, so you've got 20 alternative regulated companies, and then 8 that elected to stay traditionally.
Okay, those are the ones y'all wanted to audit too. You have not done an audit to make sure their rates were.
Yes, we're supposed to audit them, and we plan to. It's just really how often we're going to be able to audit it according to our budget.
And of course, they needed funding in this budget to pay for the auditor, so that's the reason Representative Lunsford came back with this bill. I mean, the end user pays for it regardless. So, all right, 29 is Tommy Smith. Okay.
Companies, what impact, if any, will this have on your private? I have one in my area. The reason I'm asking, what impact would it have on them, if any?
Well, I mean, you're talking about how much money would it be to audit one of these local phone companies that we're talking about? About $35,000 is what we're expecting for. So the smaller companies, I mean, that would be something they recover out of their rates. My guess is that would be a fairly minimal impact on their.
Covered out of the rates?
Yes, sir.
They're already too high. So actually it'd be passed on to the people then, wouldn't it?
Yes, sir. But the idea would be that the auditors would come in and make sure that there's not something being put into the rates that shouldn't be. So.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions? Representative Lunsford, are you ready? Are we on hold, or what do you want to do?
No, sir. I'm ready.
Okay.
I was just talking to the PSC's attorney. We have one amendment from AppEcoDev where they had asked, because they had opted for alternative regulation. I guess the original act was 465165 back in 1995.
All right. Talking to your mic.
Yes, sir. I'm at 18. I wish I was 18. Back in 1995, when we did the separation, created this code section 465165, AT&T, there was a law in the books that said if you had more than 1 million phone lines, you could opt for alternative regulation. And so their people have expressed an interest to have this amendment placed into it. I can't get a definitive answer. I've checked with Mr. Lanier and Ledge Counsel. He thinks that it's not really applicable to them anyway. But there is some hesitation to throw the amendment in without doing a little bit more research. When I met with the PSC just then, because it becomes more of a policy issue than if someone in the future ever said, I'm choosing alternative regulation, although they can't tell me a time that they've ever actually audited that company for anything. So this is an amendment that's printed right here, Mr. Chairman, and that's kind of up to the committee to decide. We could adopt the amendment, or we could pass it to full committee with the amendment attached.
Okay. I'm going to rule it out of order.
That's totally up to the chair, sir.
Okay. The mood of the committee now, I would entertain at this time a motion and a second to try to move it to the full appropriations committee. I got a motion, a second. All in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed, like sign. Okay. We will recommend this to the full appropriations committee as a substitute. Okay. Okay, Commissioner Abram, DOT. I'm going to ask y'all to come to this front table right here, if you would, where you can sit down. We got 2 soft chairs for you, and you can be flanked by your staff. They can sit in the hard chairs. And Commissioner, while I'm thinking about it, I've got the full document too, the governor's document. I'm going to ask you some questions from. Have you got yours? Okay. I hope every committee members have theirs with her. So. Excuse me? Okay, good. You got a good memory there, Representative Lucas. Okay. Do what?
That's impressive.
Mm-hmm. Okay, you can go ahead and start. Hopefully, let me make sure, test that, make sure. Wait a minute.
Is it working now?
See if that button, is there a button there?
Yes, sir. It's turned on now.
Okay.
I think that's working. Can everybody hear me? I think that's okay. Well,
try it again.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Good.
Well, thank y'all for having me here today, and I apologize about last Friday. Again, I was trying to settle a case, and glad I can be here today to answer any questions you may have. But our actual budget, in my mind, is relatively simple this year. There's not a lot of new ads, and so we'll just start on page 3, if that's okay, Mr. Chairman. Well, we were going to start with we passed out a budget recommendation sheets. We'll just go through a budget presentation to point out some changes on that, if that's okay. The first of all, our motor fuel collections for 2009 are currently being projected at $1.042 billion for the Department of Transportation. The first things that happen on our budget is literally debt service comes up right off the top of those motor fuel collections, and that's GO bond debt service and our debt service for our Garvey bonds to CERTA. So you'll see to the tune of $215 million in GO bond debt service, as well as to the CERTA debt service of $63 million. That would come right off of that $1 billion right to begin with. The next piece that comes out of those motor fuel dollars is our matching funds for our federal transportation dollars, and that's about $282 million for those matching funds for those federal dollars. And the third thing that comes right off the top, of course, is general operations. So we take debt service, our matching funds, and then general personnel services right off the top. And our general operations is about $324 million. The funds that are left out of that $1 billion projection is what we basically put towards our local assistance programs. All of those are state aid or LARP or some component of local programs. We're requesting $60 million for our LARP program, which is the same as last year, and that's our local area resurfacing program. And that program has been very successful and has project criteria behind it, and all of our district engineers and their staff actually ride through those communities, rate those roadways, and so that program has been very successful with us. It's solvent. It's we don't have committed dollars more than what we actually have budgeted, and the way that works with the communities is that they actually submit their priorities to us on those LARP dollars, and then we work with them to establish which projects will be funded. So it's based on a true scoring criteria for LARP. The other two categories, off-system and most needed, those are local assistance programs as well, and we've requested a total of $70 million, 35 in each of those categories. And that's the state aid program that some of you may have heard me talk about in the past. And I think most of you all know how that state aid program works, but I'd be happy to take any questions on that also. And that's a total assistance of about $131 million to our local program. The other $25 million would be to fund the Transportation Infrastructure Bank, and that would go directly to funding local government's revolving loan program for local programs that would be for local assistance programs directly to those communities to fund that infrastructure bank program. So that's a total of about $1.042 billion, and that's our projected revenue estimates for motor fuel collections next year. The other additional recommendations that we have that are above and beyond that is freight logistics transportation study. If you flip to page 4 of the presentation, for about $500,000. And what that is one of the things is we started working on and looking at the data that we needed in order to develop a state transportation plan, a true comprehensive transportation plan, is we realized that we were missing some freight data. And what this would do is allow us to get that freight information and start working towards a true freight logistics movement through our state. And what that means is we've never had in the past freight data from U.S. Customs. And Customs, we've been working with the folks to help us get that information. And what would happen is we've requested from Customs directly the information of how freight moves from our port through other parts of the country. And it would have to go not to DOT, but to a separate entity that wouldn't be available for open records request. That's one of the stipulations with the U.S. Customs, is it can't go to us that are subject to public records. And so it would go to Logistics Innovation Centers, what we're hoping for, over at Georgia Tech, to help us with this freight implementation plan. And so this would be not the actual study itself, but part of the implementation component. We are looking at and attempting to work with the governor's office to set up a group to help us with that, and there's some proposals going around on that in the past few weeks as far as what that would look like, and of course with all of your help in the House and Senate to help us figure this component out also. The next component would be the air transportation component. We're asking for 3 additional positions for the new hangar. I think most of y'all know that we've gotten recently the new hangar as a donation from Bell South, and that facility is still out at Charlie Brown Airport, and we are requesting 3 positions to help us with that operations of that facility. One would be a facility manager to run that building, because needless to say it's a lot larger than the one we have, has complicated mechanical, electrical, plumbing systems that we would need a full-time facility manager, and of course full-time security out there as well. The second position would be for a person at the front desk that would represent Georgia and also work when the economic development brings folks in there, just to be a customer service space, to be the first person that you see at DOT, receptionist, direct you to the areas where the flights are leaving from, and be basically that face for the state of Georgia at the front door. And that's something we're very interested in. We don't have that receptionist type position at the other office, and the way this hangar facility is set up is the pilots and those crews would be on different floors than at the front door. And there's actually, the way this building has been constructed, is there's a space there for a receptionist. And the last position would be just a cleaning of the hangar, just someone to help us with cleaning. It's a large hangar space, and we would need someone to help us through cleaning throughout the facility. The last new item would be federally required aircraft inspections. That's for 2 per 2 King Airs, and those are federally required, and we need to do that on 2 of our airplanes. So relatively simple information on those new additional requests. Moving on to page 6, the Transportation Infrastructure Bank, Of course, the governor has proposed a $50 million infrastructure bank. $25 million of that would come, as previously mentioned, out of the state's motor fuel collections. And here are some other proposed locations for the remainder of that $25 million to come from. The One Georgia Fund would be $15 million. Of course, they'd have to be approved through their board. And Georgia Highway Authority, there's $5.4 million left in that old highway authority that we could use those funds to support this. And that's an inactive authority that's administratively attached to GDOT. And then state general funds of $4.6 million to reach the total $50 million transportation infrastructure bank. So that's the proposal for funding that, but of course the big piece will be coming out of those motor fuel dollars. On the next component of our budget presentation would be on the capital outlay piece. And that's, if you flip to page 8 of the presentation, basically we're requesting $230 million for our Fast Forward program, $10.5 million for our district office in Tennille, and $3.4 million for harbor maintenance, in which GDOT is the local sponsor for the harbor maintenance program down in Savannah. And I'll go through each one of those. The Fast Forward program on page 10 just talks about it's basically a $15.5 billion program. It includes $11 billion from the GDOT regular transportation program, federally funded, $3 billion in GARBI debt, and $1.5 billion in general obligation bonds or guaranteed revenue bonds. So basically what we would be requesting is that the next component of the GO piece, which would be $230 million for the transportation component, transportation funding for Fast Forward. We are currently on our GARBI bonds. We have, in fact, Earl and I have just gotten back this past week from New York, and we're looking at our second sale for our GARBI bonds, hopefully on the 26th of March. And that would be for a total of $600 million on that GARBI bond sale, the next piece of that. So we hope to have our ratings from the rating agencies by the 19th of March on those GARBI bonds, and this piece would be, the piece that we're requesting is the general obligation bond piece for $230 million. The next item that we think is very important, that just to be honest, Mr. Chairman, you'll see me back again next year on asking for additional work for a capital outlay for our district offices. And I think some of you have seen some of our offices around the state. This is on page 12. We are asking that we get general obligation bonds to the tune of $10.5 million for our Tennille office. And what that means is what we like to do, we requested these funds last year for the Tennille office, but we requested them to come out of the motor fuel dollars. And we think this is a much better opportunity and a way to pay for these capital outlay requests, is to do it through general obligation bonds, because we're the only state agency that has to pay back those GO bond debt service, and this is a shorter payback period for us instead of taking it just right off the top out of our motor fuel dollars. So we think it's a much more beneficial and economic way to help us pay for those capital outlay requests, because we're going to have to pay it back anyway, but at least this puts the payback period on capital outlay over a much longer period. So we do have desperate needs in our capital outlay program. One of the things that we are working on now is working on a true capital outlay program, a project program to outline those requests over the upcoming years, so that we can present to you, hopefully at the next year, next budget meeting, a 5-year capital outlay plan of what we would propose on repair and replacement of our facilities across the state. What we're looking at is something that I'm excited about from my past life, is a prototypical design, and that saves money from a design perspective. Typically, if you're designing these district offices, we've gone to a prototypical design, and GDOT is literally, out of my past life, one of only 2 state agencies that have gone to prototypical design. And it's a savings issue when it comes to engineering on the front side for these facilities, and basically it becomes a site adaptation for that project. So we think this is beneficial, and I can tell you from my past life in vertical construction, prototypical design typically saves you money on the engineering pieces up front. So it would be a Silver's LEED certified design, and what that means is it's environmental. LEEDs is the standard certification for environmental design, and we would like to go for a Silver LEED certified on this particular project to kind of help show that GDOT is environmentally sensitive and that we are doing things that even as we build our facilities that are sustainable and green. Just some pictures of our facility. If you flip to page 13, needless to say, it's inadequate office space. It's doesn't have enough space for the people that we currently have. A terrible HVAC system, old wiring, problems with the leaky roof, you name it. And our Tennille office is in desperate need of repair. So we would propose a new district office for Tennille. And the last component of our capital outlay request is a $3.4 million request for being the local sponsors for the Federal Navigation Channel in Savannah. And what that is it's actually a pretty interesting program and a pretty neat program. I wish, Mr. Chairman, to be honest with you, that we could get out of being the local sponsor on this program, but the reality of it is the Corps of Engineers will not allow us out of this local sponsorship. In fact, I sat down and talked to the Corps, and we recommended that the Georgia Ports Authority be the actual local sponsor on this project, and the Corps would not allow us to do that because Georgia Ports Authority does not have condemnation rights like DOT does, and basically what they told us is that the entity that's the local sponsor for them has to have those types of rights. So it appears, Mr. Chairman, that we're going to be the local sponsor for this for quite a while, unfortunately. And this $3.4 million number that we've got in our request has been verified by the Corps of Engineers as to those funds that would be matching dollars for their federal dollars to continue the navigation channel component, the harbor maintenance. And how this works is actually pretty interesting. We own about 10,000 acres down there, 10,930 something acres, I believe that's right. Close to it. And what we do is we dredge the harbor. The sludge goes onto a piece of our property, and we literally let it dry. And as it dries, we build dikes. We pour the sludge into it. It dries, and then we move on to a different piece of property. And we continue this operation through about 6 different parcels. And so you build a dike, you put the sludge on it, it dries, and you build another dike on the next piece of property. So it's a rotation through our property that we own down there for this sludge and dredging operation, and that is all of our request in our budget. And I would be happy to answer any questions that you may have on our current request.
Representative Tommy Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a couple of questions. First of all, when we had our informal discussion a few weeks back, if I understood you right, your plans were, whenever we got the new money in for the 09 budget, to try to go back and honor the commitments that had been made. I know that's been a tradition, at least as long as I've been down here, to do that, even though you may not agree with all the projects. Since they were already local governments planning on them, you would honor that. Is that still your position?
I'll tell you where we are with that program. If the amended budget gets signed and we get the additional funds in the amended budget, we'll be about $25 million short on those commitments. And what we've done is we've sent out letters. In fact, I think probably all of y'all have been copied on those letters to the local communities, specifically asking them for project prioritization on their list of projects that are in the state aid program. And we sent out about 700 letters. We've gotten about 100 of those back so far. And what we're doing right now is we're calling each of those communities who have not sent in those letters and asking them where they are. Now, what we've been finding out has been some really good news, is that those commitments that have been on the books have been out there for a really long time. And when we sat down with some of these communities, and I've probably done it with probably 20 cities and counties looking at their list, and what we found out is that those commitments out there, they didn't even know they had. So some of them we've been able to take immediately off the list, and some of them we've been asking them if they would defer until this July 1, until we kicked into a new budget. And that's been going very, very well. So I think that we are going to do everything we can. I think we're going to be really, really close to being able to honor everything that we have out there, between canceling projects and between them prioritizing their projects for us and helping us get into the next fiscal year. So that so far has been very successful. And the ones that we are pushing out on a daily basis are the ones where the community already has right-of-way certified. They've already spent money on preliminary engineering, and regardless of what type of project it is, we're sending those projects right on out the door. So the ones that are really ready to go are the ones that we're pushing out as quickly as we can. So yes, sir, we're doing everything we can, and believe me, I'm doing everything I can to honor those commitments. But we're still a little short, but I'm hoping that through this information piece of them coming back to us with their project prioritizations and finding out what's truly on the list, that we'll be real close. We'll be real close.
Thank you. The other question I had, and you may want to get back with me later on this, I had heard that they were having a little problems with the new bridge down in Brunswick. That may have just been speculation by some of the elected officials. I think they'd had a boat or two to run into the bridge, and it may not have been any problem of the state. Are you aware of any problems of the bridge down there?
No, sir. And Buddy, do you know of anything?
Okay, thank you.
One of us do.
Representative Lucas.
Commissioner, what is you all's bond ratio? Is it 8-to-1, 5-to-1 when you are selling bond?
Why don't you answer this one? This one I don't know.
The current bond ratio for 09 in terms of what we're selling in against the revenues is 5-to-1.
5-to-1. Explain something to me, because I was thinking the tollway authority, which sells your Garvey bonds, use the Garvey bonds for the tollway authority. And my understanding is that that is not correct. You just use them as a conduit to sell.
Yes, sir. They're our financing arm. It's sort of like the same situation that GSFIC has with all the other state entities. When, for example, Board of Regents gets general obligation bonds approved, GSFIC is the financial arm that sells for Board of Regents, sells for DOT on general obligation bonds, sells for, every other state entity. So CERTA does the same thing for us at DOT for our Garvey bonds. So they're just our vehicle that we sell those dollars through.
Now, on the $243 million, I guess. Under the governor's proposal, it's an additional $32 million in 09 on debt service.
You're talking on page 3.
I would assume where it adds up to 195.
Yes, sir.
That's additional $32 million on debt service.
Yes, sir. That is.
All right, and what you say is that comes out of motor fuel.
Yes, sir. It does.
All right, so basically we are conduit to put it up, and then you get it back and pay it off.
Yes, sir. That's correct.
Right.
That's correct.
How much do you have to put up per million? I mean, what is this? $85,000 for a million debt service? Or?
No, sir. The general obligation debt service for the state works differently than the Garvey bonds and any other guaranteed revenue bonds. The general obligation bonds are obligations on the credit of the state of Georgia. So literally only one entity in the state of Georgia can issue general obligation debt, and that is GSFIC. Now what DOT does is we pay our debt service back out of our motor fuel, unlike any other state agency. For example, when Board of Regents gets a project approved and they get general obligation debt, they don't have to pay their debt service back. It's paid for out of general appropriations, and you'll see that in your rest of your bill where that debt service is paid out of general funds. But what happens with DOT is DOT actually has to pay those GO bond debt service back, and that agreement goes back long before my time and long time ago. And I don't know if you gentlemen know the history on that, but I don't know the history on that. But we're the only ones that do pay that back fully. Now, Ports Authority pays back a portion of their general obligation debt. but not the other state entities. So GO debt can only be issued out of one source, and that's out of GSFIC, and that pledges the credit of the state. And how the determination is made for the amount of general obligation debt for the state is made is through our current debt management plan that's approved by the GSFIC board. And that board sets typically, compared on other AAA states, the ratio of debt to the previous year's revenues in order to set that debt ratio. We run about 7% right now in general obligation debt. This Constitution allows us up to 10%, but the debt management plan keeps us around 7. Now, if you add Garvey's into that whole piece, from a debt management plan standpoint, it brings us up to around somewhere around 8%, but it also includes the federal dollars on the revenue side.
Now, when you're dealing with the federal highway funds, do you all get what I call future allocations and use those? In other words, monies that will be coming, say, 10 years out, and you take them and use them for projects right now?
Well, that's what the Garvey bond sort of is. The Garvey bond basically is the debt service on the Garvey bond is for 12 years. And what it does is it is a grant anticipation loan. So we sell dollars that are not backed by state credit, that's done through CERTA, for those future federal dollars that will be coming to the Department of Transportation. That's exactly what the Garvey bond program is.
All right, so when you do get the federal dollars, then what do you do with the federal dollars? If you're selling the bonds, what do you do?
We spend those federal dollars. First of all, we got to pay back the debt service, but we spend those federal dollars on transportation projects.
Well, I understand it, but wouldn't you be paying that out of the motor fuel tax?
I'm not sure I understand the question. Right, it comes out of the federal reimbursements.
Well, what I'm saying is you said basically that on future, and that's what you do to use the Garvey bonds over a 12-year period. Now, I would assume that you're going to get the money sometime between the 12 years from the feds. And if you're paying the Garvey bonds back with the motor fuel tax, then what do you do with the money that you get from the feds? You just put it in other projects?
You want to answer that one? I mean, I'm not sure I quite understand.
What I'm saying is that you just told me you sell Garvey bonds.
Yes, sir.
I asked you about future allocations of federal highway funds. You say you use Garvey bonds, and basically that takes place for 12 years. Now, when you do get those future monies in from the feds, what do you do with them? Do you just use them on other projects?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. We use them on other projects. That's correct.
Representative Lucas, you remember we did that through the Barnes administration, and it's all based on the future of federal motor fuel. So,
The problem is, Mr. Chairman, motor fuel is going to be more than $1 billion. The gasoline going to be up to $4 a gallon. You know, the state does make a nice little piece of change off the tax on it.
Well, that brings up a question I'll ask the commissioner in a minute. But I noticed the federal motor fuel allocation is down from the previous year, based on the governor's budget document. So that will be a question at that time. So Representative Royal.
Commissioner, on your air transportation, you mentioned that we have a new hangar. Most of my experience is anytime somebody's giving us something, it always costs us a lot more. Is that going to be the experience here? I see we have to have 3 new positions.
I would say that I actually, from my previous life, I actually worked on this project and worked on this transaction. And I'm pretty excited about this because we are actually looking at and working with economic development to find us a tenant to come into the space. We have an entire floor and about half a hangar that will be empty. And we've been working with Department of Economic Development to find us a tenant to pay those additional costs. And I'm hoping that that when you see me next year, I might be able to tell you that a tenant is in place and that we won't be asking for those dollars. Because I'm hoping all of those payments will help us from an operations and maintenance standpoint, pay for all those expenses, and that's kind of our intent. Now, we've moved up the previous the previous hangar cost us $1 a year in a ground lease from the city of Atlanta. This hangar is going to cost us a little over $100,000 a year through this ground lease with what's actually Fulton County and the airport authority. So our intent, what we're working on now, is to make this completely a revenue neutral issue once we get a hangar tenant in place, and that's the charge we've been given from the governor's office.
I assume you're talking about a non-state tenant.
Yes, sir. Right now, what we've done is we've moved into the new hangar space, and we've moved our Department of Natural Resources folks with us, and the Department of Transportation, and also our airport aid group will be moving out there as well. So has the airport aid group moved yet? I don't think they have yet. They're just starting to move. And
John, just go right here next door if you can.
No, sir. And so our intent is to hopefully make this a revenue neutral with an outside tenant, because we will have a lot of hangar space and an entire floor available for rent.
Another item, you have $730,000 for federally required inspections. It says one time in the budget document, but aren't these periodic inspections required on all the aircraft?
Yes, sir. This is, and the reason it says one time is because we won't need these for a couple more years. Is that right? And it's for 2 King Airs, and basically, and Earl, you can go over this, you know this better than I do, but it's basically for 2 King Airs, and so you will see us come back. It may not be next year, but it may be in a couple of years that we would have to ask for those re-inspections. But if there's some new there's new funds for new airplanes, we would not be needing those aircraft inspections.
I hear you.
Essentially, the service to be performed is based on the amount of hours on the engines, and since the King Air C90Bs are turboprops, it's reblading the turbines, for each one of the engines, and we think that it'll be the cost. Usually, they just get pitted in. They don't, test out sufficiently to allow us just to tear them apart and rebuild them. So we replace the blades. That's an expensive process, and it's called a hot section for each engine.
Yes, sir. One last question on air transportation. We have quite a competition for the use of the aircraft. Can you tell me what your priority list is on how you allocate the usage?
To be honest with you, I've never been asked that question, so I'd have to get an answer back to you. Do you know the answer to that?
For the most part, it's first come, first serve, and we do give priority to the governor's office, the speaker's office, and the lieutenant governor's office. Beyond that, anybody else that qualifies in state government is done on a priority list. Okay. So if aircraft's available, then we'll schedule them.
Thank you.
How about Chairman of the Appropriations Committee?
And Chairman of the Appropriations Committee, I forgot that.
Thank you.
Commissioner, I know you and Mr. Moffis went to New York, 3 days last week?
Yes, sir.
Okay. What was the feel for the bond? I know the bond rating was good. How about the feeling for the bond rate? Surely the bond rates are going to be down. Would y'all get any indication of that? I'm hoping 50% less with the softness we have right now.
I'll say 50%. I'll say that it was interesting to hear the folks both from Fitch's, Moody's, and Standards & Poor's talk about rates, because they've seen the market so volatile that I don't think we heard a real good feel for where they really thought this would come in.
No rumors at all?
I didn't hear.
It's probably going to be less than what we paid for last Garvey's.
Well, I know it'll be less.
However, the issue is there's a big problem with insuring bonds in the market, and because of that, as well as the volatility of the market.
When you say insuring, what are you saying?
People buy bond insurance to bring a AA rated bonds, which these are.
To make sure that whoever is borrowing pays them?
Yes.
Kind of like a contract bond with the DOT?
So most of these companies that have been insuring bonds, their ratings have been devalued, so their ratings have dropped down significantly. So there's very few people that have AAA ratings to insure bonds.
Who are those people?
AmBank is probably the largest. They're large insuring companies. AIG, there's about a half a dozen companies that just are in the business of insuring bonds, but their ability to have catastrophic coverage has been called into question. That's why their ratings have actually dropped.
Warren Buffett's in that business too, is he not?
I think he's
Berkshire Hathaway?
Yeah.
Okay. He's a player, I know.
Yeah.
So you don't anticipate it to be cut in half like like you're paying right now, 0.0854. You don't see it cutting to 4.5%.
No, it'll probably be a little less than 4.5.
A little less than 4.5.
Yeah, but we're not paying. When you say half, we're not.
Well, what you're saying now, the latest bond rate is 0.0854.
Yeah.
So my question to you is, do you think it'll drop to 4 or 4.5%?
They were talking about 4.25.
Yeah.
So the latest debt service we have here is not correct.
I would not think so.
Okay.
And I can get you that.
Yeah, I need that. That frees up a lot of money. Okay, Commissioner. On your proposal on page 4, the freight logistics transport study, I hear what you're saying, but why does it cost $500,000 to do a freight logistics transport study? And who is that person or company or multiple companies, and how long will it take, and
Well,
who are the lucky dogs, I guess?
Well, let me just say this. There aren't any more lucky dogs since I've been there.
Good.
And I'm making sure that there aren't any more lucky dogs in that study. This number, just to be
Vance and I want to bid on it if we can.
we'd love for you to, Mr. Chairman.
Okay.
But you'd have to be the most qualified person to get the job.
We are.
And I would say that on this freight logistics study, this number was put into our budget by the governor's office, and so we've got some additional work to do on this freight logistics, and really it's more of an implementation plan than it is a study. I hope that we're going to be able to pull some of the folks from a volunteer standpoint, sort of like we did with some of the Commission for New Georgia work, to help us with the first components to set this up, and then go out with an RFQ for the implementation component only, not the study piece. So that's really where I would like to see the money spent, Mr. Chairman, is not for the study. We spend a whole lot of time at DOT studying stuff, and there's some things that I think that we can get for free, which would be helping us through this from the Logistics Innovation Center, but this would help us through the implementation component with the Logistics Innovation Center.
How did you come up with the figure of $500,000?
I didn't come up with a figure of $500,000, Mr. Chairman. That is something that I think we can probably provide you some background information.
OPB or?
Yes, sir. I think OPB was involved in that. Yes, sir.
Okay. Okay, next on the 3 positions for the new hangar facility, what do you pay a facility manager for security, and also individually the secretary?
Hold on just one second, Mr. Chairman.
Okay.
We got right behind us.
You got a Diet Coke?
With comp and benefits, everything on those positions is, for facility managers, $84,540, and that includes all the comps as well. So and the fringes. So the salary would be somewhere around about $60,000. A hangar and aircraft cleaner, the total comp and benefits, everything on that is $36,145. And a customer service representative would be around $49,000 comp and benefits, so that'd put it somewhere around $35,000 a year. The facility manager component, Mr. Chairman, we've done, believe me, in my past life, I sort of know where we are with facility managers, so that's why I asked for those additional dollars, around $60,000, because we are not paying some of our facility managers here on the Capitol Hill what we need to, and they're very hard to keep and they're very hard to find. And so I'd like to bring the person in that we know that we can keep for a while.
Okay, while we're talking about facility manager, where the hangar is now, do we not have any kind of manager out there now? I know that one time I've been there, I saw pilots and a receptionist, and I thought there was a facility manager there. Or
we don't have a full-time facility manager. There's a chief pilot out there, but that's it.
So he was kind of the operations guy?
Yes, sir. And what we're looking for is somebody. It has a very extensive 90,000-gallon storage tank system out there that has to be properly maintained, properly attended to.
Right.
And what we found is, and I can tell you, I've met with some of the the pilots, and they are having to fuel some of the planes. They're having to deal with some of the work in the plane areas, and are not necessarily qualified, the most people, to do all of that fueling work and the day-to-day maintenance on the facility. It also has an HVAC system that has an old boiler in place that we need to make sure somebody understands how to run a boiler, and it also has a 4-pipe chilled water system. So there's some things out there that we've not had in place before.
Okay. One other thing I need to ask you on your recommendations here. Under the Transportation Infrastructure Bank, I noticed the governor's recommending One Georgia fundings of $15 million.
Yes, sir.
Does that allow it to go to all the 159 counties, or is it only designated to the 113? I think it's 113 that are part of the One Georgia now. Like Hall County is not in the.
Yes,
they're
sir.
in a level 3 or whatever they call it. We're not a level 1 or 2.
Yes, sir. I don't know the answer to that question. I'd have to get some more information on it for you, but I'd be happy. I asked the same exact question that you did. Would that allow it to go to all the counties? And I don't know the answer to that. But and I don't know One Georgia statute, but I'd be happy to find that out.
And the other thing, the Georgia Highway Authority, how long has it been dormant? That $5.4 million.
5 years, 6 years.
The last time we made a payout was a little over 5 years ago, and to be honest about the code section in which we had fiscal responsibility to make repayment actually has lapsed now, so legally there's no encumbrance against that money by law.
How long has that been in existence?
Forever.
Forever, back prior to the 50s when the the original code section was out there, and then
I don't ever remember that being showing up in the budget documents. Was it?
No, it never shows up in the budget documents because it was an offline, almost lease repayment system that was actually banned in
by
the
Constitution.
Yeah.
Contracts prohibited has been banned now, so it's defunct.
Yeah, so it's functioning.
What else we got showing? I know we got that. How about the the outdoor advertising fund? Isn't there about $15 million in it? Is it $12 million? $3 million?
$3 million.
Why doesn't it show up? Same thing as far as.
It goes to defray the operation of the inspection and maintaining the overhead sign program that we have, just like we do permitting, and that is offsetting the.
Use that microphone there, Mr. Moffitt.
Sorry. It offsets the cost of operating and maintaining our permitting of our rights of way. The offset or the additional funds beyond our cost to operate the program, we send over to public safety because they enforce the weights and measures part of it. The enforcement officers actually go out there with scales and weigh the trucks. Most all of those type of programs you're mentioning, they go toward maintaining and operating the program. Technically, by state law, an agency can't be an enterprise making money.
And I would add something to that too, Mr. Chairman. We actually had this discussion just a few hours ago about getting a list of all those outside revenue sources, and we'd be happy to send that to you as well because I have not seen all of them yet.
It'd be nice.
Yes, sir, I agree. So we're definitely going to be looking at those and what they can be used for. For example, the wildflower tags, what kind of numbers are associated with those wildflower tags. That's set aside typically for our roadway enhancement program for the planting of wildflowers. And I need to get my hands around what do those funds look like. They're less than 1% of our overall budget, but I still, 1% is still 1%, and we'd be happy as soon as I get that list to send that to you as well.
But why wouldn't that show up as a program-based type program, even though it's dormant? That's the question I have. Is we've been on this program-based budgeting for how long now? 5 years now.
Because it is not even a program.
Yeah, but it's still there with money in the bank. But
the only thing that takes place once a year, the state auditor reviews that account, and once we got an okay, and any time we get an authorization by the state auditor to transfer the funds out, just like this, that's what we'll do with a defunct operation like that.
Okay.
And Mr. Chairman, it's not just Georgia Highway Authority. There's multiple authorities that are offline. For example, the Georgia Building Authority has a penal, markets, and a hospitals authority that you never see in the budget anywhere, that are old authorities that are offline as well, that had money in those authorities that is just sitting there. So all of those old authorities, if there's no activity and there's nothing new in that program, it doesn't show up in the budget. It's not just the Highway Authority. And there's a host of those.
Okay. Chairman Smith here has Chairman Vance. Your Vance.
Well, I guess I'm on the same line too. Would we expect in the future to see all of these other old authorities to start showing up? Because when we sit down and talk about the budget, if we hadn't gotten into the part about the infrastructure bank, what would we have done with $5.4 million? I mean, I think sometime we need to see all those, not only in this agency but every agency, so that when we sit down and talk about the budget, we're talking about all the budget, not just part of the budget.
And yes, sir, Mr. Chairman, I would say that is not, from our standpoint, that's not. I didn't hide my authorities when I was at GBA, and I don't intend to here. That is a much bigger issue in my mind that the chairman would need to take up with OPB and those other entities that do know where those funds are.
Right.
But I can tell you, my intent is to bring all of that information to you.
Right. Okay.
Okay, Representative Hanner is 26. Okay.
Commissioner, let me ask you something. I know you've gone over this before, but if you don't mind, do it again for me. The move that you're making from Capitol Hill, could you give me the timing and that type of thing?
Yes, sir. Well, we are, and I'm not sure how far you'd like me to go back as far as the process we went through. We
no,
actually,
just
when we're moving.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Okay. When we're moving, we actually got multiple phases that are going on, and it'll start. We've got some starting at the end of this month, and it will be all the way through pretty much the end of June. And we intend to be gone really kind of by end of June, 1st of July is the intent. But we were running into a few issues at the building, some renovation issues, construction issues. So it'll probably be August before we're technically completely over there. But we'll be moving things like IT and some of those other components first. And then after session is over, the Commissioner's office and the board will move sometime probably around June.
Okay. Now, what do you be pay? What will you be paying in your new facility, square footage?
We'll be paying if I remember this right, I negotiated this deal, I should remember this, $16.50, $16 even, right? Or did we go $16.50? $16.50, yes, sir.
And you're paying what now?
We're paying right at $12, and Joanne, what's the latest number? You know it better than I do. $12.59. For yes, sir. So we'll move from $12 to about $16 a foot.
Okay. Let me ask you another thing. In order to, and I've heard several members of the legislature talk about this, one came in and threw his hands up because he didn't like forms. But in order to, before I have an appointment with you with the county, you're requiring some type of form to be filled out?
No, sir. That is no, sir. I've been through this probably 20 times, but I'll tell you what, there's miscommunication on the letter. Basically, I sent a letter out that said when your cities and counties call, what we're going to do is we're sending the city or county an agenda form. We've always done that. And in fact, Kim Cameron, the past commissioner's assistant, did exactly that, got that information back. And as soon as I get that information back, I'm calling the entire delegation, senators, representatives, everybody from that group, to let you know that we're having a meeting about that particular area. And ask you to attend, and if you can attend, great. If you can't, then just let us know. But try and also work it around your schedule as well. Because I think it's very important that I have as much help and support from the representatives and senators on these projects to make sure that we're all on the same page as far as status of those projects. We get in hundreds, and we've actually started a tracking system to find out exactly how many requests we get in a month on project status from both senators, representatives, and our board members, so I can start figuring out ways to get that information posted on a website to help with information gathering and sending. But basically what happens, then we call all the representatives and senators and our board member, and then we collectively have one meeting in that with the city, county, representatives, senators, and our board members.
Okay, thank you.
Representative Black is number 24.
24. Commissioner, a while ago, did I understand correctly that you got on these planes is up for inspection, that you got 3 planes that you called out, 2
King Air.
2 King Airs?
Yes, sir.
And it costs, that makes it nearly $400,000 a piece, I mean, to inspect them, is that correct?
There's 2 King Airs that require 2 inspections apiece, and they're very expensive inspections, yes, sir.
That just exposes my ignorance on aircraft.
Is that all, Representative Black? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Representative Richard Royal.
A follow up on that. That's not what I was going to ask, but is that the inspection, or does that include the upgrading of the engines?
It's including
The upgrade.
rebuilding of the upgrade hot sections.
Okay, that's what I thought.
Yes, sir.
Question is, over the weekend, my phone started ringing off. I talked to Buddy this morning. Highway 133 between Albany and Valdosta. Buddy tells me that I think the engineering process has been suspended until you can make further evaluations of that roadway.
No, sir. I'll tell you what's going on those projects. In fact, good thing that I'm glad you asked that question.
I am too.
We actually have some projects that about 145 projects that are tied to 79 different contracts. And what happened is these contracts have expired. And what that means is, literally the contract term is ended, but we've allowed people to keep working on these projects without a contract in place. So they fall into 5 different buckets. The first bucket is they're complete with little to no work left to do on them. There's projects that will be involved in project prioritization when that's done. And then there's remaining work to be done in-house that we can finish in-house on about 5 or 6 projects. There's some that need to be continued under the contract as it is. And then there's contracts that are ended that needed a consultant to finish the work. So there's a whole host of problems with those contracts. And one of those projects, I don't know which pile that one falls into, but I can tell you that that's where we are with that project. Your consultant for that project was issued a stop work order because technically the contract had expired. And so, and Representative Royal, I just don't do work without knowing what I'm going to get and how much it's going to cost me. And so we've asked these folks to stop work until we can renegotiate those contracts and understand the scope of work that's required to finish those jobs. And there's, again, 79 contracts that affects about 145 projects, but they do have expired contracts on them. And we were allowing people to continue to work with no contract in place.
Right. Well, there's been a great deal of money spent to date on this particular project. So at what point will we know what the
We actually, Todd Long, who's in charge of our pre-construction group, is going through and providing to me a list of these projects, these 79 contracts, which of these 5 buckets these projects fall into. And then we're going to try and make some determination about whether we have a couple of state statutes that we have to review, just to be frank about it. One is that says the federal government will allow you with prior knowledge on a contract to continue working with that consultant and not have to go through the RFQ process. There's a state statute that limits prior knowledge differently than the federal statute. So we're having our legal team, who just produced to me about, literally 2 hours ago, their opinion about prior knowledge from a state statute, and we're reviewing that now. So I think Todd committed to the end of this week. Todd committed to the end of this week to have us a list of kind of which buckets these 79 contracts fall into, and then what our next steps are moving forward on those projects. So I hope by the end of this week I can provide you an answer. But I just am not very comfortable, and I'm sure that y'all wouldn't want me to work on a project without a contract in place.
So you will be contacting me on that particular project?
Yes, sir. I've got a whole list of projects that we're going to have to make contacts on as soon as we get this thing sorted out.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Let me follow up on that, Commissioner, if I could. When the department does a contract, is it not true if it's if they feel like it's a 3-year project or a 2-year project, are these contracts that just expired because the job is still going on? Is that the whole issue?
There's a whole host of issues around these contracts, Mr. Chairman. The first of all, we have very open-ended consultant contracts. Not necessarily with good project deliverables, not necessarily with time frames for the project, but time frames for the contract. So, and also not with a clear definition of exactly how much it's going to cost you. We don't do lump sum consultant contracts. We get billed on an hourly basis for most of our consultant contracts. So we have some real serious issues that we're going to have to work out on these consultant contracts as we move forward.
So you're referring to consultants, not construction?
Yes, sir. We have not looked. The construction contracts are a completely different animal than the consultant contracts that I was discussing with Representative Royal. Yes, sir.
Okay. I think Representative Roberts had a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. One question
All right, there we go. One follow-up question earlier about as far as letting us know, could you, when our local cities and counties actually call and ask to request, if you don't mind, before you confirm that, checking with us?
Yes, sir, we are doing that.
Okay, because I know sometimes we get a notice, and it's from some of our cities or counties, and say, we're going to Atlanta, and it's 2 or 3 days, and
no,
especially
sir.
when we're out of session.
I think I'm off now.
Turn your not track.
Yes, sir. Does that work? Is that working? I'm sorry.
Yeah.
We are every time. We had a few hiccups when the session first started, but Kim Johnson, my assistant, every time a city or county is calling in, we are contacting the entire delegation. So representatives, senators, and board members, and if we don't hear back, we're calling back to your office and saying, do you want to participate or not, and what's your schedule look like? So Kim's going through a very extensive process to ensure that we don't miss anybody. So when it appears on my calendar, I have a list of all the representatives and senators that have been contacted and whether my board members are going to attend. So I know who actually has been engaged in that conversation. And the reason for that is I feel like it's very important that we have consensus around where we're headed with these projects, because I really like for the representatives and senators to be back in charge of telling me what those priorities are. I'm getting a list from the cities, I'm getting a list from the counties, I'm getting a list from representatives, I'm getting a list from senators, I'm getting a list from congressmen, and I'm getting a list from board members. So in some communities, I literally have 6 different lists for the same area. And so what we tried to do is at least start putting something in place so that we could have everybody at the table at one time, and they could tell us which projects are priorities for the community. And I don't know that. I don't know those nuances. And I can tell you, I've met with some cities and counties where the county has one priority and the city may have a completely different other priority. Now, I hadn't figured out how to resolve that one issue yet, but I'll be looking for all of you to help us through what those priorities are. That has been a huge issue for us.
Thank you. One more question. And earlier when you was talking about these so-called defunct authorities out there, why does that money automatically not revert back to the general treasury or whatever?
It's because it's an authority, and that's it's because it's an authority. Literally, for example, literally, the authorities or commissions or other types of entities besides state agencies, it stays in that authority fund, and they can typically take funds from year to year to year without it being sent back to Treasury, unlike an agency. And so, like for example, Georgia Building Authority or Georgia State Financing Investment Commission, our money never lapses. In my past job, that money doesn't lapse; it rolls over from year to year. And the only reason you would see like the Georgia Building Authority in your budget is because other state entities pay bills to the Building Authority. Otherwise, you'd never see that.
Okay.
Representative Lucas.
I know David and I look
I'm
alike,
sorry,
but
excuse me.
sorry, Mr. Lucas, I think he insulted you just then. There you go. Both from the seed of Abraham. We are kin. I've got a question now that we got on the authority issue. That wasn't what my light was on first. Earl, is there a possibility you can get us a list of all the authorities within your agency and cash on hand, et cetera, if there are any others?
We have one.
You have one? You've already given it to us?
This one right here, the Georgia Highway.
That's the only one that's within your agency. That's the only money within your agency we don't get tracking on now?
No.
I didn't say that.
No.
Okay.
No, so we can get you. This is what we were talking about this morning. Is I want the same list that you're talking about as where those other revenue sources are, and it accounts for literally 1% of our budget. But I don't know where all those revenue sources are, like permits. We have a logo program. We have map sales. None of that is in the budget document, and I haven't seen that either. So that's the other pieces that we have not seen.
Thanks, Commissioner. If I could follow up, Mr. Chairman, I noticed that your new building that you're proposing the bonds for, it's in South Georgia, I guess, down by Thomaston.
Yes, sir.
What's the possibility of moving that up at Eagles Landing Parkway so you guys have to drive through that traffic every day and we can finally get our freeway fixed?
Well, that would change our district location, Mr. Representative.
Well,
so
we can do that, Commissioner. That's not a problem. Do you have any update? I know Buddy's sitting here, and I'm sure he's tired of hearing this, and I'm sure my constituents are tired of driving in it. Do you have any update when we may be looking at 2040 or something for the I-75 widening?
Managed lanes.
Absolutely. Well, the reason I say that is because we look at the projections when we spend the money to bond out for this new port. We're going to build this wonderful port. That section of I-75 has the highest concentration of tractor-trailer traffic any stretch of freeway. When we bring the new port online, we can expect probably total gridlock on that if we haven't finished it by then or close to it. I think Buddy could tell you what the tractor-trailer percentage is now of the traffic, and the fact we're out of lanes.
And I would say this, that's one of the reasons that this freight logistics study is so important, is because right now we don't have accurate information about how freight moves through Georgia and where its final destination is. And that should give us a big clue about what we should do with freight movement. Now, the rail component of freight has increased dramatically, needless to say, because of those exact issues. But the question becomes, do we create another freight corridor completely that doesn't take someone down through 75 through downtown Atlanta? And that's some of the discussions that we've been looking at, and we think that's important about this freight logistics
Commissioner, I don't
study.
think we have the money for it. We
Yes,
haven't
sir.
finished the projects that are already on the books. How are we going to throw another northern arc on? Now
Yes,
we're going to do a northeast to southwest arc.
I understand completely that we don't have enough money.
If I had follow up, Mr. Chairman, a question. I noticed that the building that you're proposing down there is a silver leads green building, and we're going to spend about $200 a square foot to construct it. I think it's $197.86 a foot, if I recall correctly. Can you tell me why we're going with a building that has to have certification and inspection and hire an outside party to certify it? Don't we have qualified people on staff now?
It's not the certification that's required. LEED certification
to be a LEED certified, it has to.
You pay a portion. You pay I think it's about $20,000 to go through the certification process. But what it does, now you should know my past life. I would never support the state going from a facility perspective to all LEED certified buildings. That's not something that I think we ought to do. But when we have the opportunity to look at LEEDs, it does offer a very good process to follow to look at alternatives for design. In other words, it helps you look at a better HVAC system that's more efficient and more effective long term. It may cost you more money up front, but from an energy standpoint, long term, it will save you money in the long run. So there are some things about LEEDs that I do like and that I don't like, but one of the most important pieces of LEEDs is that it takes you through a very comprehensive value engineering process and thought process about energy savings from a long-term standpoint. So do we have to pay the $20,000 for certification? No, we don't, but what I do like is that process, that thought process of value engineering out to get a better long-term system.
If I could, Mr. Chairman, follow up one more time. I appreciate that, Commissioner. And, the good thing about humans is we all have different opinions, and so I wouldn't rely on this past life a whole lot if you've eaten in one of the cafeterias at either one of these buildings in the last few months since we did the privatization. I'm not sure you've got as many fans in these buildings on the privatization of those cafeterias as you had before it was done when the inmates were cooking. But I do appreciate your standing here and taking it with us every time you come in and answering the questions.
No problem. I would say this on the you may not like the food, but at least the food service is in the black. We've never made money. We've always subsidized food service at GBA. So for the first time ever, we've actually are starting to see some revenue turn around
It's encouraging.
And that is something that we've never had, and we've been subsidizing it for a very long time. So that's one of the reasons we privatized.
Commissioner, I don't doubt that we subsidized it, but when we're talking about other agencies like Representative Royal, Chairman Royal asked a few minutes ago, we're going to try to rent out the hangar space to another state agency. What inevitably I see in the state government, which is mind-boggling, is how one state agency will do something for another state agency and say, well, we generated revenue. What we did was we got an indirect appropriation from another state agency, so it was always taxpayers' money to begin with. And so I'm encouraged by the fact that you're going to look for an outside tenant for the airport space rather than try to get it from another state agency, because then what you get is an indirect appropriation from another agency. So it didn't help us a bit. The bottom line is still the bottom line.
Yes,
so
sir.
I appreciate that very much. Thank you.
Yes, sir. That's our intent.
Okay, Representative Tom Graves.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Commissioner, one of the frustrating things I think over the past several years has been the nutshell game of projects moving around and never really being able to know where they are in a process. And just when you as a legislator think you've got it figured out, it moves into another fiscal year or another phase of a project, or backwards generally. What can you as a department provide this committee and the Transportation Committee as an annual report of status of projects, where they are, where they're planned to be, when they'll be there, and so that maybe one year we can compare the two and go, wow, they're all staying where we thought they would be, because we're not here year round, and it makes it real difficult to come back the next year and realize that it's all changed again.
Well, I'll say there's a couple of things that are going on, Representative Graves, that's very important that will be forthcoming for more information to everybody. We have something that we're doing right now called project prioritization, and we signed an MOU, a Memorandum of Understanding, with Greta and our partner at ARC to look at developing project criteria. So literally we have this bucket of 9,000 projects sitting out there. And we've got to create some sort of sieve to get down to what we actually let per year, which is around 269 projects. So what are those project criteria to help us establish a list that we can actually stick to? And interestingly enough, we had the same exact conversation this morning in the staff meeting, because we're going to have to work on what those project criteria are and develop that with our transportation partners to figure out which ones will really go. The reality of it is we get thousands of projects from ARC. That's one metropolitan planning organization, of which we have 15. So if we're only able to let 269 projects and we have 15 MPOs that are submitting thousands of projects per year, which ones are really going to be the ones that go first, and which ones are going to be the most benefit to the state? So what happens is that we promise a lot and we shift things out. And the reality of it is, we just finished a discussion this morning that in order to get us to a physically sound standpoint for this year, we're going to have to shift projects out of 2008. Now, what I laid down to the staff is that we're going to do this once, and we're going to shift these projects, and then we're going to figure out which 260-something projects we're going to let per year, and that's what we're going to work on. Because the reality of it is, you can't continue to promise thousands of projects, and then when you get down to the nuts and bolts of it and actually follow the numbers, you're only letting 69 projects per year. So I can tell you that what's coming is going to be some very hard, difficult decisions, and it's not going to make a lot of people happy. Because putting reality, in my mind, one of a leader's responsibility, and you'll hear me say this a million times, is to bring reality to the situation, and that's what we have to do with this project list, is bring reality to the situation. We don't have reality to the situation, and we can't continue to allow projects to come in the door, spend money on these projects from a preliminary engineering standpoint, and sit on the shelf because there's no construction money or right-of-way money. And by the time we get right-of-way and construction money, the preliminary engineering's outdated. So it's not doing anybody any good to continue to promise, and we've got to get to a list that we can actually deliver. So that is our intent. Now, Gerald Ross, our chief engineer, promises that project prioritization will be finished by the end of August. So by the time the session rolls around next year, we'll have some clear, definitive information about where we really are, and those projects that we feel are shaking out of that list that would be top priorities for us. And I can assure you, when we do that, there'll be projects in your district and there'll be projects in everybody's district that won't make the top of that 269 list that will probably upset a lot of people. They've been promised a lot of things in the past, but my job is to make sure that we deliver on what we say we're going to deliver. And so it's going to be a hard summer.
Can I follow up, Mr. Chairman? So the state aid and the LARP funding in here, is there an associated project that ties that number out to make it what it is? How do you? And then from there, if you could answer, I guess what we've seen in the past is that there's a beginning of a project. We know that there's so many millions of dollars that are appropriated to start projects in a year, but we also know that some of those projects never do start. So the money just sort of hangs out there. It was appropriated for a purpose, but was never utilized.
Yes, with the board on closing out projects. Yes, sir. I'll tell you, Earl has done some pretty amazing things on some of that work. We have projects that are not closed out in addition to not getting started. So, for example, we have a whole host. If you take that 9,000 project list and sort it into the piles of construction, preliminary engineering, right-of-way, construction, and then final closeout. There's also a pile of projects that are in closeout that have never been taken off the books, and there's money sitting there. And so what Earl has been working on for a couple of years and will continue to work on is getting those projects closed out to free up those dollars so we can put that money to projects that we can move forward with. So you're exactly right. There's projects on both ends of that spectrum that have not been proceeding and pushing forward. I mean, I asked Greg Mayo, who's in charge of our construction office, to take the 900 projects that we have in construction and divide that down to the different phases of construction. Is it in active construction? Is it in material completion? Is it in final closeout? And the reality of it is a large portion of those projects are in the phase where the contractor has not received, has finished a job, but we've not taken the stuff off, we've not taken the project off the books. So there's money associated with each one of those. And we've got to clean that piece up, just like you're talking about on preliminary engineering. Now, when you mentioned LARP, state aid, and the STIP process, LARP is, I'm not touching LARP. LARP is the one that's going pretty darn well. We have project criteria in place. It gets sorted through on a priority basis based on a score. So anything 25, is it 25 or 28? About 28? 28 that scores 28 and above. Basically, those are the ones that are most needed, and that's kind of how we prioritize those. And we work with the community and say, here's your projects that scored 28 and above, and you tell us which ones are your most important. And this is your formula. There's a formula that's based on number of people in the area and miles of roadways in that area that generates a formula that says in X county you get X number of dollars, and we fund those top priority needed projects to the formula amount. That's why LARP is solvent, because it was criteria-based, it was driven by formulas, and it was driven by engineering data decisions. State aid, in my mind, is what we've been doing in state aid, helping those communities work with priorities, is a much bigger test for what's about to happen on our STIP, our State Transportation Plan. State aid is just a tiny little component of prioritizing their projects. Now we're about to hit the big ones. We're about to do the exact same thing we've asked them to do in state aid in this STIP program. So the rubber's about to hit the road on the big projects. And we'll find out which ones are their priorities in the STIP as well. So I've sort of used state aid as a good test case to see what happens when reality kind of comes into the situation. So far, so good. But I can tell you that when we hit this STIP piece and we prioritize the STIP, it's going to be difficult.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, if I can make one more comment. there's been a lot of discussion about finding additional revenue sources for transportation, and it's real hard for some members to support any effort in doing that when you really don't know what's going on and where are we in the projects, and some are programmed, yet they've never been initiated and the money's sort of hanging out there. And I think you would get a lot more support for that if we got to a point to where we really were seeing where we are in a process from year to year to year and what are we accomplishing, so that we know that we're measuring the results, and we'd have a lot more comfort in that. But thank you for your efforts to move that way.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Chairman Tommy Smith.
It seems to me that when you think about the Developmental Highways Program and all these state aid projects that are needed, but you just don't have the money out there, I've become convinced that there's just not enough money to keep Georgia competitive with the other states. And, of course, this ties in economic development. And my question is, would you agree that if we could approve this opportunity to give the people the chance to vote on additional money for DOT, wouldn't that give you some flexibility on some of these needed projects that you don't currently have?
I'm not sure I understand the question on that. What I see is the transportation funding piece. If you ask me if we need additional transportation dollars, there's no doubt in my mind from the list that I currently have in the office, there's no way that we can fund the projects that we have currently. And if we continue to add projects to that list, our problem is only going to get worse. So when it comes to the question, do we have enough money to do this, I'm relatively convinced so far that we don't. The question that I do have, and that is not for me to make the decision, it's for both bodies of the legislature to make the decision, is how to collect those funds equitably, how to distribute those funds equitably, and what taxing amount could truly be the amount that is enough. Now, if you ask me, Mr. Chairman, how much is enough, I can't answer that question today. There's no way that I could answer that question today. We know that of the active projects that we have online right now, it represents about $29.5 billion worth of construction. Now, we don't have that, and if you look at what we get in federal and motor fuel dollars, it's about $2 billion per year. If you do the math, that's 15 years worth of work just on our active projects. That's not on the 9,000 project list. So do we have a funding issue? Absolutely. Do I know the right mechanism? No, sir, that's not my debate. That's representatives and senators' debate to figure out what is the best mechanism and how that should move forward.
Mr. Chairman, if I might ask one more question. Going back to something that Representative Hanner said earlier about you moving over to Washington, wherever you're moving to. A few years back, the Secretary of State diversified a lot of her offices out into the state, rural parts of the state. And I know we get in a kind of a box of thinking up here. Sometimes it's hard to get outside the box. But I was just wondering if you and the board had given any thought with the district offices we have around the state, and the fact that land and everything's cheaper, plus we don't have the competition that you have in the Atlanta area of the big corporations getting so much of the labor pool. If you'd given any thought, maybe long term, of moving some of these operations out into the state that are currently here in Atlanta.
Well, I'll say this, Mr. Chairman. When I did this on the state property office side, I'm the one that put together the RFQ for DOT's move. I didn't know that I would be part of that moving operation. I didn't know that I'd be going at that time. And I can tell you the stipulations that the previous commissioner gave to me when we put out that RFQ was to be within 5 miles of the state capitol. So that limited our search on available office space to 5 miles. So that's what we started off with the parameters from the previous commissioner. Now, looking back on it, if I'd known everything I'd known, I sure would have liked to expand to that a little bit more, because it did limit the number of opportunities down to about 8 or 9 offices that actually could accommodate the size that DOT is as far as number of square feet. So it did limit our search significantly. And we have a building committee onto your question. I hope that answers the first one. And onto your question whether the board has been looking at additional opportunities, and the answer to that is yes, sir. We have a building committee that is headed by Mr. Bill Kolke, is also working jointly with Mr. Larry Walker to look at where GDOT's permanent location would be long term. And the reason I mention that is the lease that we've signed is a 10-year lease with 5-year and 7-year outs. So in 5 years or 7 years, we could easily opt out if this building committee chooses to send us in a different direction. We've also taken Mr. Kolke and Mr. Walker to New York, Chicago, and Boston to look at multimodal stations where you typically have retail, office space, and multimodal connections of different types of transportation. And that's of interest to the board to look at those types of multimodal stations, that DOT could possibly be a part of that. And there's been discussions about with Federal Highway that they could fund portions of a multimodal station, but we would have to fund some of the office space components. But there's definitely a lot of options out there still for us.
Okay, I'm going to stop right there. Let's take a 5-minute break. There are a lot more questions, Commissioner. Let's take a little break, and it's 5 till. Let's just come back at 4.
Okay, yes, sir. What do I need to know about this?
Same thing you proposed here.
Need to quit. We'll go ahead and start back. No. Okay. Okay. Representative Hanner, why don't we go ahead and call on you?
Yes, ma'am. Lost my place here. On the
You got your mic on over there, Chairman?
On the
Yeah, it's on.
Okay.
yeah. Explain to me the Transportation Infrastructure Bank.
Okay. What this would do is be set up through CERTA at the State Road and Tollway Authority, and it would work like very similarly to what GFA already does with water and sewer loans, and what the Georgia Land Conservation Council already does for conservation projects. And it provides low interest rate loans for communities to start and work on and pay for transportation projects. So now I did the setup on the last infrastructure bank for conservation projects, and you typically have two pieces. One, you have the technical review and you have the financial review. And the technical review is typically done by the expert in the field. For example, on the land conservation program, that technical review is done by the Department of Natural Resources. In our case, on this state infrastructure bank, that technical review would be done by the Department of Transportation, and the financial review would either be done directly through CERTA or could possibly be contracted with GFA to look at the financial review. And what you need the financial review for is to ensure that the county's governments have the viability to pay that loan back. And those low interest loans are with GFA right now are around like 3%. I mean, it's absolutely. I can't remember what the last one was. Kevin did through with the Lake Lanier Island Development Authority, but it was around 3%. We couldn't even sell bonds for the rates that GFA is putting out in these low interest loans.
Okay, my point is on it, and I'm sure some of that does help some of the smaller rural communities. One Georgia, when it was adopted to help the rural city communities out in the state become part of just as much as the largest cities, and since then I'm afraid we've gotten away from. We've added on to those small cities and counties, and that's what my concern is. But that's $15 million out of the One Georgia Fund, of which I can see a lot of it probably does go to those small communities.
Yes, sir. The way this works, I mean, the one thing that I really liked when we set this up last time for the conservation programs is that you get to look at the financial status, but it doesn't preclude you from, you have to look to make sure that they can eventually pay it back. But GFA's never had a loan to default, and so they're willing to work with those communities on the terms of that payback period. And that, to me, is very, very encouraging for those small communities. That's something that they've never had the opportunity to look at or be involved with.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Representative Lucas.
Commissioner, where are we with the rail passenger authority?
Well, I don't even think we have an employee anymore, do we? There's not even an employee, is it?
No employees, just the board.
Right, there's just a board and no employees, and I don't know when the last time they've met.
Now, is it is the rail passenger authority on the GDOT or is it on the Greta?
It's under us, isn't it?
It's attached to us.
But separate
administrative function.
It's a pass through, like through DOS. Like DOS has several agencies attached to them that they pass dollars through. It's the same thing with us.
Now, at one particular point, they had a bunch of money. Have they done anything with it?
Well, if you're talking about the Lovejoy line, there's $109 million that Federal Transit Authority has authorized for us to use, and 3 years worth of operations and maintenance expense that we've been able to figure out how to do that with. But the other 17 years that are required, for example, if we started passenger rail and something happened and we ended up having to close passenger rail, we'd have to pay all those dollars back, and we have to outline a 20-year plan with the Federal Transit Authority of how we'd pay for operations and maintenance cost. And what we don't have in place is a 20-year plan for the operations and maintenance cost of the Lovejoy line.
How do they do it in the other parts? I mean, Amtrak comes through North Carolina and goes down to Florida. It comes through Georgia, down Savannah, and goes through Florida. And then they got commuter rail. I mean, it's commuter rail as far as I'm concerned. When you go to New York and come to D.C., and I don't think they're making a profit with it. I think the federal government has to subsidize it all the time.
No, sir, they don't make a profit. Average fare box structure for passenger rail is between 30 and 40% nationally. So there's this 60 to 70% that we would have to look at subsidizing passenger rail from an operations and maintenance standpoint. So the fare box is not going to cover passenger rail. If we go down that path, we are going to have to go in this understanding that there will be some subsidies that will be required either from local communities or from the state government.
Are local communities and state governments doing it in the other states?
Yes, sir, they are. And in fact, for example, in Chicago, the Passenger Rail Authority is actually kind of interesting. What they do is they have a requirement, and they're the only one in the country that I know of that has this high fare box structure of about 50%. In fact, it's a statute, it's a state law in Illinois that they have to meet the fare box on passenger rail by 50%. And they do a lot of things to do that. They sell advertising, they rent out space in their stations, they do a lot of things to meet that 50% structure. But if they don't, they start cutting service. Now, you'll find the other communities are somewhere around 30 to 40% is the typical, and you should count on 30 once you enter into that market until you start building ridership. So, yes, sir, they're all subsidizing, and what they typically have done is they have a separate authority that operates those passenger services, is what most of the states we've seen so far do. And we don't have that kind of we don't have an operator in place here in Georgia right now for passenger rail, but that's typically what they do is they have a separate authority for the operations component.
One last question, and I want to know when and how long it's going to take. 7516, the worst interchange in the system.
Yes, sir.
3 weeks ago, they had a wreck, tied the whole two-lane highway up, headed south to Savannah on 16 for 3 hours. And when it merges, the people think that you're merging in a two-lane and it's one lane. And when the tractor trailer pulls over, everybody goes to run it. Now, the question I have is, the project was moved up one time. Then we have people in Macon who stay on the other side of the river. And if you know what I mean, the Shirley Hill neighborhood is on the other side of the river. Back in the 60s, the interstate was supposed to have been on the other side of the river, and they held a meeting at the courthouse and changed the plans of the interstate in an hour. That meant that the interstate ran through Pleasant Hill and split up a community. Now the Pleasant Hill community has agreed with the folks, with DOT, about the expansion of 1675. And rationale is, when they put it on the other side of the river, you got the railroad tracks, 2 cemeteries, and you're bound. So therefore, you got to go up and you got to go out into the river in order to widen the interchange so it would take traffic. Now, if you're coming 75 from Georgia Avenue to 16, if you have a flat tire, you got to call the police to come out there because there's not enough room on the side for a wrecker to come and tow the car away. And they won't even do it unless a police car's out there. Now, how long does it take? Does it take for somebody else to get killed at that interchange?
No, sir. I'll tell you exactly where we are with that project. This is one that I've been looking at for several weeks now. We we understand clearly that 7516 is one of our most dangerous interchanges in Georgia. In fact, it is about 34% above the state average as far as incidences are concerned. So there's no doubt in our mind that it is a safety issue. So when we developed the design that we currently have, there are several things that we looked at from that perspective. One was the weave issue, one was a left-hand exit issue, and of course the traffic incident rates. And what we found is, we developed this design that, now you've heard I'm sure you've read the paper, as all of us have. The Macon Telegraph says it's 14 lanes wide. Well, it's only 14 lanes in one section that includes collector-distributor lanes. And the question that I've sent back to the engineering staff as of about a week and a half, 2 weeks ago, is to take a look at, the project is $200 million, and we don't have the money to fund the project as is. But there are 3 areas that are significant traffic problems. One is coming 7516 coming 75 south to the interchange. One is near Spring Street, and then one is where 75 breaks off and there's a weave. A weave issue. So I've asked Ben Buchan, the head of urban design, along with our chief engineer Gerald Ross, to go back and see how we could solve those 3 areas without building a $200 million project, which we don't have. Now, the problem with this is that the Federal Highway requires us to develop a 20-year solution. And so the 20-year solution includes all these collector-distributor lanes. And the reality of it is that, we don't have that money, so what can we do to solve these 3 major areas that are of big concern and have, needless to say, the incidences, that the problems that we have in those areas to solve it. So the reality is, I've had those guys go back and say, look, if we can't afford $200 million, we have to solve the safety issue. Let's take a look at these 3 areas and see what we can actually come up with. And they're in the process of doing that now.
Well, Commissioner, I hope that DOT doesn't decide, well, we don't have enough money to spend. When you spent the money on Spaghetti Junction prior to you getting here, they took care of the problem. We're in Macon, Georgia. The problem needs to be taken care of. Now, several folks have been killed at that intersection.
Yes, sir.
And then 3 weeks ago, they tied everything down for 3 hours, and you couldn't get past. Now, one section of the community is raising sand about they don't want it, called it Spaghetti Junction. But that section of the community is part of the problem that we have the problem with the interstate right now. And that is that the interstate is on the side, part crossing the river, a railroad track, which means the railroad is not going to move the railroad track to the other side of the river, and 2 cemeteries, both historic. Now, there's no way to go but up and over into the river in order to solve the problem. And when you come around on Spring Street, because I'll be leaving in 5 minutes, by the time I get home, I'll be backed up 2 miles down the road before I can get off the exit.
Yes, sir. Spring Street is one of those areas that are the 3 top problems in that.
So hopefully we can resolve this problem. The same problem y'all have with the folks over there on Forest Hill Road. They don't want any change, and the part of the problem is it's too much traffic out there.
But, and I'll say this, Representative, this is a project that has our chief engineer's attention as far as safety issues are concerned. So we are clear that we need to do something about that interchange. The question is what we can afford, and if we can solve these 3 safety concerns around this interchange without spending the full $200 million, we want to look at that option as well. So we do have the $200 million plan on paper, and what we've also done is they've gone through several designs and actually shrunk that interchange to help solve some of the community outreach issues. And they've got a good design on the books, and it meets Federal Highway, and Federal Highway's been hand in hand with the entire guys during the design process. But I want to be sure that we can afford it, first of all, and 2, if we can't, let's figure out a way that we can afford to solve those 3 problems.
Well, if you can't, let's start on 1675 down to Spring Street, and then we'll worry about the rest of it when we get to it.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay, Chairman Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Back to Tennell. There's some property down there next to the facility we have now. Have we already gone through the negotiation with that guy, and we're going to build right next to that while we work in the old building and then tear does that $10.5 million include tearing down the old building?
That should be the total cost for that, including parking lot, site prep. It's got a full generator in case we lose power, and a records retention or storage facility built into the building.
So that,
and it does include the property, yes.
yeah, so that's worked out with the gentleman next door that's got the...
It's almost a swap type deal that when we vacate our property, that'll be used to repay him, or he has an option to go ahead and take that property with him.
The way that's set up, too, if you're looking at the property, the old building, that property is to the left. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And then the sign shop and all is kind of in the back right. Am I thinking right? So
yeah,
he'll have the property out in the front when you do the swap, or however it works, and we'll just have the property around his property then.
In the back and around, yeah, and we'll have that host side and corner.
And then so we can have that entrance on the right and go around and come out instead of just one.
Which will give us an L or almost a U-shaped.
Right. Okay.
Because right now we have no other access to the back corner of our property without going all the way around.
Right.
So this will allow us to drive all the way straight through now.
Talking about using that prototypical design, what's the number of employees there? I thought there were a lot more employees there than there are in Thomaston. Can you use that type design that you use in Thomaston and just enlarge it for the tunnel, or how does that work?
No, to be honest with you, the tunnel office has about the same amount of people as the one in Thomaston. And
what's that, 120 or?
About that amount, yeah. I think we.
Yeah, 104 is what we got it.
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, okay. I was thinking that office was bigger than Thomaston.
You know, I think the only difference is that that doesn't include, you know, the outbuildings. You know, you looked at the when you were down there where we had the IT training room.
Mm-hmm.
That'll be put in the third floor, and I think there was also another unit that was working outside of the building that we'll bring inside. So there's 104 currently working in the office, but there's probably another 20 some odd people that we'll bring in when we get rid of their buildings.
I got a couple more. How about on the small airports? You know, we finally got $5 million in there last year on kind of upgrading the small airports as far as safety or resurfacing. And where are we? I guess two-part question. Where are we on working with these small airports and using that money to upgrade? And number two, what's the plans of DOT to try to help these small airports in the future, since our neighboring state spends about $174 million on the same number of airports, and we're down about 11.2, I think, is the most since I've been here in 16 years we've spent.
I'll say this on as far as our airport program. One of the things that what's Carol's last name? Carol Comer is the head of our airport program, and I've met with Carol a couple of times, and our airport program is just off the charts busy right now. So what we're currently doing is we've hired a consultant to help Carol help move these projects along where we got the additional funding. So she, in fact, I think I signed an extension a couple of weeks ago, Mr. Chairman, for that continuous airport aid support. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to have to put that contract back out to bid and go through the whole process and select a consultant, start over, and support Carol's staff. It's really turned into more of a staff extension than it has anything else as far as this contract is concerned. So our program is very, very busy, and we know that we're going to have to do something, either bring permanent people on permanently to support that if we continue to get funding for it, or either we're going to have to continue the staff extension contract to do that. Now, as far as the $5 million, the governor's recommendation was to take that out as far as a one-time aid issue, but that is, needless to say, we have 102, I believe is the right number, aviation facilities around the state, and it's important for us to have all modes of transportation, not just focus on roads and bridges. Now, as far as our plans are concerned, I've not met. Maybe Earl and Buddy knows more of the detailed list of what we're planning, but I have not seen an actual airport aid plan yet since I've been there.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, we can provide you a list of the projects we're working down that is in that $5 million and the status of each one of those projects or either contracts, because a lot of them are in the negotiations phase. Some are still being estimated, but all those are moving forward.
Yeah.
I think there's a desire to go ahead and try to implement that 20-year plan for upgrade of the tarmacs, the runways, as well as the taxiways. So we can provide that also and show how all that interfaces. And I think we provided the chairman a list of projects that are outstanding against that 20-year list.
Because I just think if we got the 5 in there, I hate to see us reduce the 5 to have to come back and fight to get it in, when I would think that there are more needs out there. You know, $5 million is a lot of money, but when you go to resurfacing 102 airports or lighting or whatever they need as far as safety equipment, I just hate to see us lose that 5 and not have it in there. That's all right for right now.
Commissioner, in the governor's document on page 400, I'll let you turn to it. It talks about performance measures.
Yes, sir.
Shows FY 2006 actual, FY 2007 actual, FY 2008 estimated. Then it shows FY 2009 estimated. I guess my question is, who plugged these percentages in that are showing there? Was that just a hypothetical? Somebody just plugged it in to make you look better, or what's the rationale behind that?
Well, first of all,
Heroes, I'm for Heroes. Don't get me wrong on that, and they're doing fine. But you know, you're talking about point increases like on local road assistant from 27% to 60%.
and I would say, Mr. Chairman, that it surely wasn't put in here for me to look better, because that was done in September, and needless to say, I had no idea that I was going to be here in September. So
how about 09?
And I would say that I haven't seen these projections, and same thing as far as those are concerned. I will tell you this on performance measures. I think that we probably need to go back and look at these performance measures, and I can tell you that we will be changing the performance measures that are in the document to accurately reflect some of the things that we are and aren't doing. And I can tell you that I'm not comfortable with those. I'm not comfortable with performance measures. And I can tell you some basic things that we need to be looking at is, you know, that are not on here is some of the things we're already starting to look at from a performance measure standpoint is, you know, turnaround time on supplemental agreements, turnaround time on periodical estimates. We just got our first report this morning from Earl's group on pay when pay clauses for invoices, and we still have more work to do on there. So as far as the performance measures, you are required to submit some sort of performance measures for your department, and that's really all I can say about that.
So this came from the GDOT? These percentages?
Yes, sir.
Who did these?
It was a combination of the Strategic Planning Office working with all the owners of each one of these performance measures, and working with the Budget Office to get them submitted on time. But Strategic Development is actually the unit that put it together, and it was based on, again, working with each one of the owners of each one of these areas.
Okay, next question is item 4 under State Highway System Maintenance. Item 4 shows about number of shoulder miles of litter and debris removed. Why would we drop 6,128 miles?
I think it was
It dropped.
I guess I looked too close at y'all's document, I guess.
No, sir.
Somebody's got a lot of litter someplace.
They just reduced the cycle of what they from a cost saving standpoint. So
Is that because we're subbing it out now, or using a third party versus the department used to do it, buddy?
yeah, majority of the litter pickup is already being done by third party through prison details or through our interstate mowing contracts.
Okay. But why such a drastic 6,128?
The only thing I can think of is, again, when they went through and did their budget, they decided to do less litter pickup and use that additional revenue for another activity.
What activity would that be?
I don't know off the top of my head, Mr. Chairman. I apologize.
Okay. All right, on page 401, Commissioner, shows local road assistance. Your agency request was $207,184,555. The governor bumped it by $18 million. Can you tell me why? Then the next one, the Pavement State Road and Tollway Authority, he bumped it $30 million. over and above your recommendations. And why would he do that?
That latest debt service numbers.
Yeah, just to revise debt service figures that it's an estimate and it's calculated in OPB works with us, and they'll plug in the most recent numbers when we make a sale or when we anticipate a sale coming up.
Now, on the state road and tollway, Earl, that's the latest debt service numbers, but on the local road assistance program, I'm pretty certain that's a projection issue, Mr. Chairman. That our projection originally was lower on motor fuel collections than the governor's projection, and then that number got revised, and when it got revised, those additional dollars always go to local assistance programs. So, we go through the...
So that's over and above what you thought it was going to be.
Yes, sir.
Before you took office, right? Or
yes,
took
sir.
position.
Yes,
okay.
sir. And that's just to be honest, Mr. Chairman, that's going to happen probably every year. There's always some discussion about when we get those projected numbers from the Department of Revenue, and it typically is after we have submitted the budget. So Earl does a projection on those revenue dollars, and then we get the number, the actual projection from Department of Revenue. So you will typically see that depending on which way you'll see a difference between what we submit versus what actually gets in the governor's budget, because he'll have those Department of Revenue numbers and we won't.
Y'all submitted the numbers. Of course, you were over at Properties Commission. Y'all submitted them, September 1st?
September 1st.
Yes, sir.
Okay. So on the payments to the state road and tollway, why would it bump $30 million?
That's strictly, I assume that includes our next bond issue when you guys decided on the next bond issue.
Just to pay the debt service off of this $230 million? Is that what that is?
No, sir. There's been some discussion, Mr. Chairman, about when we do Garveys. And we've done one tranche of Garveys, and we're about to do our second. And the second is another $600 million. And the question is, at that point in time, I don't know what was submitted at the budget time, but I have a feeling there was a lot of discussion when I came to the department about when that next Garvey issue was going to go. And we actually ended up pushing it later than earlier. And I assume that's the debt service changes, but we can go back and investigate with that. But I would be willing to bet that it's the debt service on those issues.
Okay. Well, I was just surprised what the department submitted. Then it bumped $30 million, and that's a chunk of money. It is to me, but that's the reason I was questioning it. Okay, Chairman Smith.
On that same line right there. We're looking in the big document on page 401, then we're looking at yours. Is there any way we ought to be able to correlate your document with the big document? I mean, because...
I would hope so.
If I'm looking at CERTA debt service, y'all have got on this document, his recommendations are $63 million, and I've got on this document $109 million. So that's $44 million difference. I mean, am I supposed to be able to look at both of these and see the same numbers?
I would hope so.
Yeah, we have two parts of that money. That one of it is the actual GRBs, the guaranteed revenue bonds, that's already been out there, and what we added onto that is the additional what we call the RIBs. These are the 20% match to the GRBs. So when we first talked about the size of the program, it was a lot less than that originally, so ours was put upon what we put together. So we can go ahead and show you the math of where we go from the 63,708 to the 109, and be able to show you why there's that difference.
Why don't we explain the RIBs? You need to explain the RIBs, how that works.
Well, let me ask you right there. If y'all's is 63 on this document that we just got today, but in the book is $79 million. Is your request?
You can see the amount matches. You see that little footnote we have here?
Yes, 79,516, which says star total funds.
Yes, sir.
All right, so that's your number right there.
Right, and that amount is what we have calculated in here, and this is the additional issue that we're going to have in 09.
Okay.
Because what we're selling right now is going to be the 08s. This is forward-looking to the 9s, and we don't actually take that money out until the governor is approved in OPB for us to go forward on that.
We actually think that next sale, Mr. Chairman, will be in June or July. Is kind of what Earl and I are thinking about now. We talked to GSFIC and CERTA and that group, and they're actually telling us more like August, September. But I think we're going to need more money before then to pay the bills, more like July or August. So we're going to have to work on that with
More transportation funding? Is that what you're saying?
Yes, sir.
Okay, just want to make sure that.
The difference in the total, just to make sure we're clear, we showed the 79,516.
Right.
Ours does not just anticipate the 09 sale, because it would be dependent upon being approved, the Just Fix plan. At that point, on top of that, the state did not approve the debt management plan up until probably about a month ago. So we did not have that confirmed, and we did not include it in ours. But the governor did have that draft copy in hand when he prepared his document.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, so I guess, Mr. Moffitt, I can just assume when y'all did the proposal to the governor, you knew he would come back with a higher recommendation on the debt service as far as not state highway, but the state road and tollway authority. And that usually the way it is, you send your proposal in, he bumps it $30 million based on what he wants to put into the budget.
That was part of the state's debt management plan, but it had not been approved a new updated year. So I think it's a 3 or 5 year plan?
It's a 5-year plan.
That comes out regularly. So again, we did not include that additional 09 amount for the Garvey program in there initially.
All right. Okay.
One more on the document, page 401. Right up under administration, you got one line, it's airport transportation, and then you got the other one, airport aid. I see y'all recommended $2.4 million. His went $3.4 million. What's that for?
Yes, sir. The difference in that is the numbers we discussed as far as the airport hangar. There's some additional dollars there. Now, I don't know all the differences of the $1 million, but I can tell you that at the time that Earl submitted the budget, we didn't know if the airport hangar deal was going to come completely through. And so the request that I put in for the additional air transportation dollars and the for the 3 new positions and the 2 federal inspections, those got added at a later date after I came to DOT.
Okay.
So and that actually happened before y'all got here, but after we submitted the original budget.
Okay, add those two together. I know it's 900,000, and that's close to $1 million. I guess if it gets close, we just count it as $1 million, huh?
No,
I mean,
sir.
that's a few dollars
I'll
left.
find out what the $100,000.
Yeah, find out what that other
yes, sir.
100 is. Okay, thank you.
And then coming down on the state highway system maintenance, just looking at 07 on the expenditures, it was $931 million, but the governor's recommendation, or y'all's recommendation, agency request was only $346 million. Can you tell me why there was such a swing of
You're just talking about
almost $600 million?
between state maintenance. You want to talk about the budget piece of how this works?
And in 06 it was $804 million, but now, that's a lot to go the other way. And when I read these documents, this kind of stuff stands out to me.
Well, that's one of our...
Use the microphone, if you will, Mr. Moffitt, please.
That's one of our 18 or so programs we've got out there. And most of the money for the maintaining the state highway system or any other of our programs is based on a continuation budget, and the changes mostly are in the area of salaries and other type of stuff. And when we put together our estimate, we do not put together all the personal services. That's probably got half to the department, or pretty close to 45% of all of our employees in there. So by the time you add the workers' comp, you add the fringes, the continuation of the salary, and everything else out there, that would explain the dollar difference. We can itemize that and bring those two figures together if you'd like us to.
Well, it's just, I was just, it's such a drastic difference. That's the reason I was concerned about it from 06 to 07, and then,
Mr. Chairman, I would add to this. As far as the expenditures, I'm having a hard time tracking where everything was expended by program.
Right.
So we have never done at the department program budgets presented by those individual departments. So this summer, we're in the process of doing individual program budgets by division director so that they can come in and explain their budgets. I'm not very comfortable from the budgetary programmatic standpoint of where we are. So they'll be presenting those new budgets to us over this year. So I'm not comfortable, just to be frank about it, Mr. Chairman, that those numbers are 100% accurate on those categories.
Okay.
From an expenditure standpoint.
But let me go on down to less federal funds. Why would there be, I guess, Mr. Moffitt's 07 to 08 current budget, why would there be such a drastic change on Fed funds as well?
It's advanced construction. It's advanced construction dollars. And what happens is on advanced construction, Mr. Chairman, is they were, DOT in the past, we were, going out and authorizing more federal dollars. Basically, it's advanced construction. You put a project in advanced construction and there's no actual dollars there. You have to go back and eventually authorize those dollars. So what we did in 07 is took down some of this advanced construction, increased our money coming into the program, but it's going to, as long as we move forward, that number is going to decrease because I'm not going to do any more advanced construction.
So we did Garvey bonds and also advanced construction.
Advanced construction is the biggest piece. If you look at our federal appropriation dollars over the past 5 years, you'll see a huge jump between 06 and 07, just like you picked up, and that is AC. That is advanced construction dollars. And what that means is that we were, I'm very clear about what the state constitution says, that if you sign a contract, you've got to have the money in the bank to do that. And we are going back and taking some of this advanced construction off the books, putting actual dollars to those projects. So you're going to see a different number next year. You're going to see a smaller number because we'll be taking down more advanced construction.
Okay. Okay. On page 403, State Highway or Federal Highway Administration under State Highway System Construction and Improvement. We're looking at $67,915,371 less. And I guess my question is, explain that to me, since I didn't know anything about advanced construction.
Either way, it's based on our federal appropriation, the projection.
So we're more of a donor state than we were before.
There was less available federal dollars is what it boils down to.
What do we get, 92%? Is it still 92?
It's probably less than 92%.
So it's dropped since the last couple of years.
Before, up until Safety Lou, it was 86.7%, and we're probably, hovering around 90%, 90 cents on the dollar.
That's not good then, is it?
It's better than it was, but not compared to a lot of those states. The average is over $1. We're below the average.
Yeah,
so we're still a donor with all the Southwest.
Okay. All right, let me ask a few more things and we'll adjourn. I know, Commissioner, I keep hearing rumors that other people have been hired. Can you bring us up to date on who you've hired, what your plans are? I notice there's a new lady to the left of your shoulder there. I've never laid eyes on her before.
Yes, sir. I brought 2 new people, actually 3 new people on board. Okay. 4 new people, I'll take it back. My assistant came with me, who's been with me since 1999, Kim Johnson. Kim Johnson. Mm-hmm. And I brought also my communications director with me, Erica Davis. And 2 new people just last week. One was Joanne Chance, who is over my left shoulder, as you pointed out, as a special assistant to me to help with some of the auditing issues. Just to be frank, is the way we currently have our structure set up is that we have Earl in charge of audits who is auditing his own group. And I have some concerns about checks and balances there. I also have some concerns about as far as the audits of our consultants. We're doing consultant audits, but we are not following through on all of those consultant audits. And the second piece of that I have concerns about is that we're not doing any contractor audits currently. So I'm not sure why we stopped. So Joanne's going to be helping us look at those audit issues in particular. Buddy is also.
So Joanne's position is what then?
She's special assistant to me right now until we start figuring out the.
So she's a CPA or.
She's been. Let's see, how long, Joanne? 30 years and 32 years.
I've been doing state budget.
Okay. You don't look that old.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
She's actually was my chief financial officer over at the Georgia Building Authority.
Okay. So most of these folks are coming from the Georgia Building Authority then?
Some are coming from the Georgia Building Authority and some are coming from GSFIC. Now, I have a meeting scheduled on the 24th of March, Mr. Chairman, to go over my reorganization plans with my board. And so before I lay too much of those reorganization plans out, I'd like to have the opportunity to talk to my board about all those issues.
You want the board to approve it, I assume, right?
No, sir, not necessarily. It's not required by statute.
So, it is not?
No, sir, it is not.
Okay. I thought you worked at the pleasure of the board.
I do work at the pleasure of the board, but that does not require reorganization to be done by board approval. In fact, I have a ruling from our attorney that says basically I can reorganize and not take it to the board, but I don't think that would be very wise considering they're who I work for. So in fact, my chairman and I are moving through and talking to each of the individual board members now. We talked to 2 last week about some of those reorganization issues, and we intend to have a board retreat on the 24th.
Well, we keep talking about out of money, and I know I read the Georgia Trend. I know when former commissioners there, we had a $7.1 billion shortfall, and then when you got there, it went to $10 billion. And last time you and I met, it was $30 billion. Then I read in the Georgia Trend is $51 billion.
I don't know where the $51 billion came from, but
I thought that's what it said in that article. Of course, they could have. Have you read the article?
No, sir.
It showed $51 billion.
The last number that I have from my staff is $29.5 billion, just like we talked about, which was on the active projects. That doesn't include all the inactive projects.
Okay.
And that's the latest number I have.
I'm almost sure that's what it said. So.
Georgia Trend was counting the projects we hadn't started, so that's why.
Oh, okay.
And the last person that I hired, you asked me who all I've hired. There's been 4 people. The 4th person is he used to be my deputy director at GSFIC. Is chief operating officer Kevin Clark, and he is literally sharing my office right now. And I'm just looking for some help, backup help, and he will be a chief operating officer appointed directly to me.
Well, I noticed in the budget document on page 401, it showed that. In the 09 requests, there was 6,115 positions y'all requested. Then the governor added 3. So I assume he was anticipating.
No, sir. That's the 3 in the aviation area. That's the facility manager, the cleaner, and the new receptionist.
All right. Since we're struggling on revenue and projects and all that, why would you bring in 4 or 5 more new people? And I don't know what you're paying. It's none of my business, I guess. But lump sum, what would you pay 4 or 5 new positions? $500,000 a year, $600,000 a year?
I don't know. I'll be glad to get you the information, but I'll tell you exactly what I intend to do. Is first of all, Mr. Chairman, we've not been operating very efficiently and very effectively. I don't think I have to make a case for that. And secondly, we have people who are completely and totally overworked and that cannot continue, as apparent by all the things that have been out there, cannot continue to handle all the pieces and parts that are underneath them. And so I intend to bring in some senior staff that can support the current senior staff that we have, to bring some additional functions from Buddy, Gerald, and Earl's group into a support services group. And what I mean by that is right now procurement is in all 3 divisions, under Buddy, under Gerald, and under Earl. And I intend to pull out procurement and make that a consolidated group so that I can ensure, most importantly, that we're being fair and competitive about how we select these consultants. And I'm not convinced that we are. And so I want somebody, and I want.
Who's in charge of the consultants now? What?
It's under Gerald's group.
Construction?
Yes, sir. Okay. So we have kind of the fox guarding the hen house. The same gentlemen who are out there working on the projects are also selecting the consultants. And I have a real problem with that from a checks and balances standpoint. And I don't think you'll get any argument out of the senior staff that they have too much to do. And for example,
meaning Earl and Buddy
and Gerald.
Okay.
And Gerald has alone in his group that a very significant portion of project and program management components. And he can't focus on the day job for all the other peripheral support services that he has to deal with, like procurement. And procurement is not something I want my chief engineer dealing with. I want my chief engineer dealing with program and project delivery. Same with Buddy. Buddy's handling IT. Buddy's handling HR. I'd like to bring in professionals in IT and HR to handle those groups so that Buddy can start looking at the district offices and the maintenance component. Earl is also doing procurement, has the largest portion of procurement through the commodity component, and I'd like to pull procurement out again, like I said, into a consolidated group. So,
Do you think Earl's worn out?
I know he is.
Are you worn out, Earl?
I'm senile too.
Are you?
No. I'll say this. I've got them working a lot of hours, Mr. Chairman, and there is no doubt in my mind that we need some additional support staff to help.
Okay. Another question: personally, how do you feel the morale of the department is at this time? I know you're making changes, and most folks don't like changes. And
I'd say the morale at the department is probably the lowest it probably ever has been.
How can you change it? How can you bring it back around? Move it into the new building, or?
Well, I think we did the exact same thing over at GSV, because when we moved into a new building, that it definitely helped morale significantly.
Well, I agree with you on the new building.
I
get depressed when I walk in the old GDOT building myself.
Me too. It is definitely old, and it's so retro that we want to probably take the doors with us, because the doors are actually coming back around, but that's how old it is. And nothing works in the building, but I think environment is one piece. And then I've already started some simple things, some real simple things that have gone a long way. I've started this month sessions with individual employees, 1 day a month, setting aside time to talk to individual employees.
You talk nice to them?
Depends on the conversation.
I got you.
The other thing that I've also done is some simple little birthday cards. Once a month we send out a pile of birthday cards to all GDOT employees. We're working on an employee recognition week that's state recognized for May. So we just set up a committee today in our senior staff to look at employee recognition week. So I think morale is extremely important, and we've got to look at those issues.
Do you think it's worse here at headquarters than it is at the other divisions, or you think because of the changeover, you coming in and the shakeout that's going on, that's causing a ripple effect throughout the state?
I think it's I think it's both locations, just to be frank about it. I don't think it's
all locations.
Yeah, I don't think it's any one in particular. I think there's I'll just be frank, we've had things like, we were talking in the staff meeting today, arson, theft. We've had people that are on our payroll that are convicted felons. We have people that, you name it. And
people on payroll that are convicted
felons, yes, sir. We dismissed someone for that, yes. 2 convicted felonies for fraud. And we've had, you name it, and I've had it. Stealing plywood, stealing
gas. Sounds like corrections to me.
Sounds like. So, just to be frank about it, I'm very concerned about morale, but I don't intend to quit cleaning up.
Okay. One other question. Since state road and tollway authorities coming under your jurisdiction, do you get paid for doing it as well? Is that an additional payment?
No, sir, but I would love for you to provide that recommendation. I'd be happy to do that, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, well, I know you're the new executive director, correct?
Yes, sir.
But you also serve on the board. Who's going to serve? How does that work?
Well, we've vetted this through the legal department as well. In fact, we've had
your legal department.
We vetted it through my old legal department and through the governor's office legal department.
How about the attorney general?
I think it did go to the attorney general as well, but I can answer that question. I'm pretty certain it did.
Okay.
And there doesn't appear to be a conflict of interest. I've gone through all that piece, and Mr. Chairman, I wouldn't have done it and agreed to it if I thought there was a conflict. And there are times, for example, needless to say, when they voted to name me executive director, that I had to recuse myself from the vote and just didn't vote.
Right.
But the reality of it is, it's really no different than me being on the board or not being on the board, because I'd still be able to vote on my own Garvey bond issues even if I am on the board. So if there was a conflict of interest, it sure was there before I got there as executive director.
Okay. Chairman Smith, Tommy Smith has a question, I think.
Mr. Chairman, you mentioned about the young lady to the left over here a little earlier, how youthful she is and all, and she betrays herself that she's got a lot more experience than her age would tell. But I think you've been with the department about 30 years. Or
she must live in your district, does she?
Anyway, I just wanted to say she's like these exotic fish that stay on the ocean bottom, but every now and then she'll surface. And I have called on her many times in the past, and I have found that when Earl's out, she can always give the answer if he's not around. And occasionally I've had he didn't have the answer and she did. So I just wanted to say that she'd be a great resource for our committee, and she's one of those that can get in there and find those hard to find answers. And I'm glad she surfaced today.
Anybody else you want to talk about, Tommy?
I think.
Okay. Any other questions? Well, that's 3 hours worth. That's long enough, isn't it?
Yes, sir. I'm fine.
Good. Well, thank y'all, and thought it was a good meeting, and this will conclude the meeting. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.